Hey gang, Voltie here, back with another deck tech. Today we're going to be continuing our series on Nadu with Yorion Nadu. Now this companion is incredibly powerful in terms of actually playing it and getting a lot of value, but deck building restrictions around Yorion are far more significant than most of the other companions available in Highlander. The gap between your most powerful card and your weakest card only grows when you add an extra 20 cards to your deck. So something to keep in mind. I've tried to offset that because I do want to explore having Yorion as a really potent endgame effect that can close out the game and generate a lot of value in any of your mid-range matchups. So here we go. To start things off, we've got a Teferi Time Raveler. It's incredibly versatile. It's one of the best planeswalkers. Unfortunately, our creature count is too high for Narset, Parter, or Veils, and Wandering Emperor is just a bit too expensive at the moment for a deck like this, so no other planeswalkers, just the Teferi to start things off. Now, unlike most of the other Nadu shells, this deck is a lot lighter on mana dorks, and that's twofold. One, the increase in mana dorks across an 80 card deck is less notable than in a 60 card deck, just because you're less likely to draw them, but the impact of drawing a mana dork in a late game situation where you need to draw gas is higher. So you want to have just enough so that you can still threaten to do it on turn 1. And notably, all of these mana dorks have some kind of upside. The Lighted Halfling can make things uncounterable. The two Hierarchs can give Exalted, which can matter in a lot of combat situations. And Arboreal Grazer is the perfect creature for Nadu, because it sticks around, but if it dies, no harm, no foul. For 2-drops, we've got Ajani, the two Coiling Oracles, Morlock, Felia, Samwise, Springheart, and Tuco, and Stoneforge. These are all incredibly individually powerful 2-drops, and I think that's really important in an 80 card deck. We couldn't really afford to support something like Tarmogoyf when we don't really have the interaction suite necessary to get it through, and a lot of the other 2-drops like Ledger Shredder and Fairy Mastermind are really conditional in how much output they can have, but all of these 2-drops are relatively powerful by themselves. For 3-drops, we've got quite a lot here. So we've got Nadu, obviously. We have both of the Elder Giants in our colors, so we have Flage and Uro. Obviously, the fact that the Elder Giants have tension within themselves and that you keep eating your graveyard is lessened when you have 80 cards, because you're more likely to draw 1, not 2. We're also spending a point on Spellseeker. Now, this is a pretty contentious point in deck building, and I think I've made it good enough, and I think that all of the other 1-point cards were worse. It has a really lot of potent targets, which we'll go through, obviously, but it's also a really good card to close out games. If you can blink Spellseeker every turn with Felia, then you can start filling up your hand with counter spells and interactive spells, and suddenly your opponent just can't get out of the hole. There's a Nissa, because we have quite a lot of elementals we can hit, an Endurance, which is only main deck because it's part of the loop, but it is also just an individually powerful card in the current metagame. It's a lot of really early aggressive graveyard-based decks, and hitting the graveyard of a blue deck is probably going to turn off a Murktide Regent or a Treasure Cruise. And then we have E-Witness, which is just always solid. Then we have Omnath, Subtlety, and Solitude to close things out. The two pitch elementals are really important to have cheap interaction, but it also gives you enough gas in the late game, especially Solitude, that you can hit off Nissa, that you can start closing, even if you're not putting a Nadu loop together. For sorceries, we've got Green Suns. This is just a typical catch-all. We've got some cantrips and card draw, and then we've got Prismatic Ending, which hits everything. No crazy surprises here. Spellseeker getting EI or Prismatic Ending is a pretty big deal, but you're more likely to get the instance, which we'll go through. So we've got Brainstorm. We've got 3 removal spells. We have Ephemerate, which is really good with the pitch elementals. It also gives you 2 Nadu triggers, so if you play a Nadu and your opponent tries to kill it, you get a Nadu trigger. and then you can ephemerate it and get another one in response and blank the removal spell. So it's quite potent there. We have a counterspell and a mana drain. The mana drain is functionally going to be a counterspell most of the time. However, at the worst case, if you have a couple of colorless mana to spare, you can use that to pick up Yorion and get set up for the late game. I've also kept my blue count really high, so Force of Will is on, and then Eladamri's Call, which can just put together combos. For artifacts, we have Astrolabe to start things off, which is good with Yorion, and then we have 4 different equipment to get with our Stoneforge Mystic. Pre-War needs no introduction. Cryptic Coat is a nice value card, and you can blink it with Philia and Yorion to get extra creatures. Jit could honestly be in the sideboard if you wanted it to. When you have 80 cards, you kind of want more individually powerful cards, so it ended up in the main deck. And then Lightning Greaves is our Nadu trigger of choice. The reason that it's Greaves over Shuko is for a couple of reasons. We're not playing Saga because we're too many colors, so we're not going to be playing Shuko for that. And Lightning Greaves notably can give haste to Flage and Uro, which is actually a much bigger deal than it looks on surface level. It's very easy to just have a Greaves in play sitting there after some other game actions have been taken, and suddenly you can do a bunch of damage out of nowhere and kill your opponent. We have a Pot and a Ring. These cards are just generically good, and then a Fable and a Binding. For the mana base, we have 31 lands. I think it could very easily be 32 or 33. And I think if I can start playing this deck and getting some road testing in, I'll have a better idea of whether or not that number needs to be tinkered. 31 equates to about 22, I think it is, lands in a 60 card deck. So on balance, it's probably fine. You are very prone to flooding, but we do have a few ways to offset that. So hopefully 31 is about right, and if it's wrong and you play this deck or build this deck, feel free to add an extra couple. There are a couple of utility lands that are of note. We've got Boseiju, Field of the Dead, Caracas, Odawara, and Yavimaya, which is to get green on our Field of the Dead and our basics, because we do have quite a lot of basics in this deck. There's 6 in total, 1 forest, 1 island, and then a snow of each. The snow basics for Astrolabe is relatively important. It also gives you a lot of insulation against things like Winter Moon and Blood Moon, just because our color requirements are so intensive. But because we're playing 80 cards, we're more likely to be fetching our mana base out than drawing a large chunk of it naturally. So you can kind of get away with it. It's very possible the mountain shouldn't be here and it should just be another land, and if that's the case, that's also fine. Our sideboard is full of the best cards in each of our colors for what we're trying to do. So we have 2 blue blasts, 2 red blasts, no surprises. We've got a carpet for the blue matchups, a couple of graveyard hate pieces, Path to Exile is an extra removal spell, a couple of counter spells, an Energy Flux and a Force Vigor for the artifacts, and then a Fury and a Damping Sphere. Damping Sphere is obviously for the big lands decks, but we can't really afford to play Blood Moon or Back to Basics just because of our own mana base, but we're not going to be casting too many individual spells per turn, so Damping Sphere's downside is less prominent. We can kind of get away with playing one big spell every turn, like an Uro or a Flage, and close it out that way. Fury is going to be a little bit hard to pitch to, however, it is important that we have access to that effect. Notably as well, Fury doesn't synergize that well with our overall game plan in terms of the main deck. We only need to be interacting with our opponent's creatures like a little bit so that we can put enough pressure on and force them into situations where they're getting buried by our own creatures. So Fury's upside is a little bit weak in there. But once you start adding in some Rebs, and you're in desperate need to interact with opponent's creatures, then you can get away with siding in the Fury. Otherwise, that's this take of Nadu. I'm not certain whether this is the best shell for Nadu, however I did want to explore it as a thought experiment. The fact that you have a companion is always good. The fact that it's Yorion does decrease that value, but its ETB is so incredibly powerful that if you're any kind of mid-range grindfest and you're both running low on resources, Yorion can draw you, 2.5, 3 cards, and then the game's over because you also have a 4/5 flyer. So that's it. Let me know if you like this deck or if you build it, and I'd love to hear about it. But otherwise, we'll wrap up there. This video was brought to you with the help and support of my lovely patrons. If you'd like to see your name up here and support me and my content, there's a link below to the Patreon. There's also a link to the Ko-Fi if you'd prefer to donate a single time instead. If you like the content, please consider subscribing. You'll be notified of upcoming videos, which is really fun, but it doesn't cost you anything and it does help the channel. Hoping to grow it, and we're getting some steady growth, so please consider it if you can. Otherwise, leave a like if you like the video, and I'll catch you all next time.